Question number 6, David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Corrections. I can see she's looking forward to it.
Order.
Does she take...
Order. No, that does not help the order. Just ask the question.
Question. Does she take responsibility for the additional $41 million above baseline funding that has been earmarked for prisons in response to the rising prison population?
The Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr Speaker, I accept responsibility for helping to secure this funding.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Clendon.
Given the government's stated goal of reducing reoffending by 25% by 2017, what is the rationale for allocating $10 million less to rehabilitation programs in this year's budget compared to the initial estimate for 2015?
The Honourable Judith
Speaker,
Collins.
I can tell the member, because I know he's deeply interested in it, and genuinely so, that reoffenders are, by the way, down by 25% at the moment. Reoffending rate, though, is 6.7% down. But the big focus this year is actually going to be on mental health and provision of mental health services in prisons.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Clendon.
Does it make sense to cut $25,000 from rehabilitation programs like Circles of Support and Accountability, which have a proven record of reducing reoffending, while increasing spending on custodial services by $41 million?
The Honourable Judith Collins.
Well, Mr Speaker, if fewer people would like to commit serious violent offending and methamphetamine supply offences, then we would be happy to take fewer of them in corrections. But while they continue to do that, then we will continue to house them properly.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Clendon.
What assurances can she give that corrections scheduling regime is fit for purpose and that inmates who need rehabilitation programs are getting access to them in a timely fashion?
The Honourable Judith Collins.
Well, Mr Speaker, I know that Corrections is taking this very seriously to make sure that prisoners can, in fact, access rehabilitation when they should be. And I can assure him that I have taken the issue to the Chief Executive of Corrections, and that is actually something that they are making sure that they do better on.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Clendon.
The Minister then is saying she is aware of the numerous and credible reports of inmates being unable to access rehabilitation programs required by the parole boards, meaning they are serving more prison time than they need to be.
The Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr Speaker, I'm aware of many allegations, but they're not always credible. In fact, sometimes when we've looked into them, it's been a prisoner who has been scheduled to undertake rehabilitation, but who has then gone on to commit an offence in prison itself, therefore no longer being able to undertake that rehabilitation.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Clendon.
As Corrections Minister dealing with the blowout of 700 inmates in the prison muster since last year, does she now regret any of the decisions she made as Justice Minister on mandatory sentencing and bail policies that have increased prison numbers with no measurable improvement in public safety?
The Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr Speaker, I would never say that to someone who has been the victim of a serious violent offender. In fact, I absolutely support the policies of this government. I'm very pleased to be part of them.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Clendon.
What evidence does the Minister have for her reported assertion that the percentage increase in the prison muster is caused by longer sentences for violent offenders rather than an increase in the remand population?
The Honourable Judith Collins.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's actually both, and what is really important, and I've heard from Corrections directly, that quite a lot of that increase in remand population is actually around the family violence being treated far more seriously in the courts by police and by the courts, and repeat recidivist violent offenders in their own homes not being let free to go home and beat their children and their spouse until they end up dead, which is what we've had, by the way, in the past.
Question number 6.